So the novel, The Tattooed Fakir, it's set in the late 18th century, around the present day Bengal, Bihar, northern Bengal. And well, the period just before the British rule in India was very chaotic. The East India Company, they were at a loss as to how to govern the newly acquired land and people, and they experimented a lot, for example, with the revenue structure, which led to disastrous effects. For example, the famine in Bengal in 1770 was much more devastating than it would have been under other circumstances, and the effects on people were very bad. And at that time, a set of sannyasis and fakirs, normally you would consider them ascetics, but they at this time took up arms against the British, and they engaged the British with in a guerrilla warfare for about 2 decades. Warren Hastings, for example, declared their group enemies of the government and pursued them. Majnu Shah, the leader of the fakirs, for 2 decades, but never could catch him alive. This is also the time when the first indigo plantations came up in the Bengal countryside. There was also a lot of confusion among the French in India, because they didn't know what their role should be when their countrymen were involved in a revolution that's at the same time. So that's briefly the historical perspective. But I also had, while writing the book, I also had certain current themes in my mind. I think historical fiction should, it's not just about the past. In a way, through historical fiction, I think the past should illuminate the present. And as you know, the debates about how an ordinary person becomes an enemy of the state, which is what Warren Hastings used the phrase to describe the fakirs, and whether these people should be considered heroes or menace to the society. So these are universal debates, and so they figure prominently in my novel. So Asif is one of the protagonists. He's a simple Muslim farmer, a simpleton really, and I tried to imagine what goes on in the mind of a simple person who, after certain incidents beyond his control, joins a group of people, rebels, who have been branded enemies of the state. There is nothing for him to do in the village where he grew up, because he's lost his family, he has lost everything. So he has nothing to lose. And when that happens, I think this is when people consider even the most extreme options. It's a very difficult choice to make, and I try to understand that transition also. When you know that happens, we have heard about this even in present circumstances. They do so after some personal incidents, but after they join the group, they are then called upon to think of much larger issues. So I try to think of this character of the simple farmer, thinking about these issues, being confused by them, and striving in the face of all these issues. And then there is this other protagonist, the tattooed fakir. It's a child who is pitted against all the unsympathetic circumstances at home and elsewhere. It's sort of a tragic character, is forever haunted by all the hatreds of the world. Then there is this indigo planter, who is outwardly seen as a very cruel person, but I try to understand this character, his aspirations, his motivations, thinking of him as from being from a poor background. So what comes out is that he is actually a vulnerable person beneath his rough manners. Then there is a brother and sister of a French manager who are not only different, very different from their the Scottish planter, but also from one another. She's very sympathetic to the natives, interested in Indian culture and music, and that gave me an opportunity to bring in the sort of history of music at that time, which is also very interesting, and I found it interesting. So these are the main characters. I think it happens both ways. For this novel, for example, I had some characters in mind. I can't explain why, but for example, this character of this physically challenged French manager, I don't know why, I don't know why, but I have been imagining this character for over a decade now. But at the same time, I've been curious about the indigo plantation, and I wanted to know what happens in an indigo plantation, the processes, etc. So from that reading, certain characters also grew. And I have also been interested in the fakirs. For example, in childhood I read Bankim Chatterjee's Anandamath and Devi Chaudhurani, but they completely ignored fakirs, and that actually made me curious about the fakirs. So I started reading about them, and through that reading certain characters came up. So it's I think happens both ways, at least in my case. There is actually a lot of material in the form of books, journal articles on the history of this period. There's no dearth of that. So I tried to read as much as I could, but I think while writing the story, I tried to forget the details of history, because the easy access to history sometimes can be can have a bad effect. I think too much of history tends to seep into the narrative, and so what if you ask me now some of the historical details, I probably won't be able to tell you, but I have the the books at hand. So I tried to make the background into a blurry background so that the characters can take shape in the foreground. And I tried to talk to some of the experts, especially some of the crucial aspects. I asked them whether these scenes that I was thinking of, whether they made sense. I think the historical fiction should go beyond what we know about history. While historians may quibble about the hard evidences for something, I think the novelist with the license of artist's license can get around this, can offer some plausible alternatives where even historians are confused about. So in my book, there's some connections that I've made which you won't find in any history books. For example, the British collectors, they noted that the fakirs used rockets around 1780s, and we know that at the same time, around the same time, there was another army, Indian army, which was making use of rockets, very successful use of rockets against the British, Tipu Sultan's army. And I wondered if there was any connection. Was there a technological know-how exchange? When I asked the expert, they said, well, there's no evidence for it, but it's not implausible. And so I was tempted to make that connection in my novel. So it's not just the history books. I think what I used is the main anchor points, and a couple of which also I tweaked around, but which I have acknowledged later in the author's note that I have changed the dates for dramatic effects. I hope people don't look for any message in my book. I hope people will pick it up as a book of a story, a novel, and I don't want to really say anything explicitly about a message, but then I did have certain issues in my mind. I was thinking of certain issues, and I don't think I have come up with any answer or any message, but I hope people may think about these issues. For example, the connection between religion and what we call terrorism. It's very easy to associate, too simple to associate, I think, and sometimes I think it's wrong. And I think this period, this set of events of fakirs, I thought it was a crucible for me to understand what's happening now. For example, this fakirs, they were Muslims, they're religious people, but they were not fundamentalists in the way we understand the term now. They belong to Silsila, Madari Silsila, the sect of Sufi. It was very different. They were Beshara fakirs. They didn't go by the book, the Shariat rules. They didn't even pray, do namaz. But what they did was a reaction to the socio-economic situation at that time, which is, I think, more important than religion at that time, and I have a feeling it's also important today, the socio-economic situation. Well, I tend to think of some name that pops up in my mind at that moment when I'm thinking of that, of that character for the first time. But I suppose if that name doesn't fit into the historical context or the perspective, then one would change the name. But I haven't had many occasions where I change the name. And I think if when you in the process of writing, you get to know the characters so well, so closely, that changing their names in the middle feels like asking your friend to change their names, which doesn't seem very fair. My kind of spirituality, my notion of spirituality is very personal. I had a very interesting advisor for my PhD. He was a very religious person, and I asked him how did he reconcile cosmology with Bible, and so he said, well, look, I look at Bible not as a textbook of cosmology, and but to guide my thoughts, my life. I don't know whether I would even go that way. My notion of spirituality, as I said, it's a very personal thing. And I'm more inclined to think that Buddha, the way that Buddha thought, I think, that it's not important to think of who created the world, how did the world come about, who are the gods, are there any gods. It doesn't really matter. What he was interested in is that you should be happy, and spirituality, if it has any uses, is to just, I think, to help you reach that peaceful state of mind, of being one with the universe, the nature, and find happiness if in some form.